looking at parents of children with medical complexity. So a population of parents that make lots of difficult decisions over time. And basically the question that we asked was, how do people conceptualize, or how do people think about how their own decision-making has changed over the course of their child's journey? Like, do they see their decision-making now? Do they see themselves doing different things than they did when their child was first diagnosed? So you can imagine we had incredibly rich interviews, and many parents told us, I'd never stopped to think about this before because I'm living in it and I'm facing each decision as it comes. And it never occurred to me to step back and to be like, oh, I've learned something about how to do this, because they didn't think about it as something that was describable. They thought of each of those decision points as discrete, but in fact, when they sat back and they said, what have I learned? They could articulate amazing things about how they changed over time and what things they brought differently to the decision now, or recent decision, compared to when they were at the very beginning. And I guess what I would say, I think the biggest finding that the biggest thing that parents said was that they learned to be more confident as a decision maker. They began to understand what the team was hoping that they would do, and they understand what it meant to be a decision maker, how to be an advocate, how to develop a sense of intuition, how to recognize who on the medical team you had a relationship with that would allow you to how to most effectively make decisions with different members of your medical team, how to partner with different people in different ways, I guess I would say. And then they talked about learning specific strategies about how to gather information and how to process that information. And different parents had different strategies that they had developed. Many parents said that early on they would Google. And so we had a lot of parents talk about how Googling, they initially found terrible. And some of them were like, this was such an unuseful strategy that I just stopped completely. Others said, I learned how to ask the questions. I learned where the right information was about my child's diagnosis. And I became much more discerning of how, I was much more thoughtful about what information I would pay attention to and what information I would not pay attention to. And then sort of similarly, parents talked about the importance of other parents and of learning from other parents. And many parents sort of pointed out that when they first started, they would see the similarities in the decisions that they were making for their child compared to other parents. But as over time, they would start to recognize the differences in those decisions and how there are pieces of other people's stories that would apply to and be useful, but not necessarily the whole story. And so they just became much more able to sort of, I guess, I would say the whole process was this experience of being able to sort of stand outside of this particular decision and recognize how this decision, the process of making this decision, as both similar to prior decisions and as having particular features that would make this decision easier or harder. So that was the last piece I hadn't gotten to, was this idea that parents started to say, making medical decisions for my child never feels easy. Like it wasn't that it felt easy, but there was a familiarity with how it felt that made it more tolerable. The other thing that they said was that they started to recognize that there were certain aspects of a decision that would make it harder, and they could sort of tell themselves, this feels harder because we're having to make it in a hurry. And it's always harder to make a decision when there's time pressure, or this feels harder because the physicians have less certainty about what the outcomes are going to look like for this. And that's part of why this feels so hard. So starting to be able to be concrete about what made that decision hard instead of just being in the emotion of the hardness of the decision.